Chess Middlegame Strategies, video 3, and strategy number 2, which is backward knight moves. Wait a second, is it like related? No, it's not related. The previous videos will be left at the end of this video, so no worries. I do believe Ivan Sokolov once said, or some of the famous players in the world of chess, he said the most difficult moves in chess to find the backward knight moves. Why? Because, guys, the knights or the bishops normally they fight from the original place, like they fight from this place, so it's fine. Like for example, if your bishop is on this diagonal here, it's easy to find this idea of bishop f1. Like it's not tough because the bishop from this square is fighting for these squares as well. But to have a knight fighting for all of these squares, and all of a sudden you just decided to go back like knight g8. This is a very useless move, you know. That's why this is one of the most difficult moves in chess. However, after the examples that will be shown, I hope things will be easier for you, will be much more acceptable for you, and at least you know there is something like that, and this is an option in chess. Let's see. First game actually we are gonna see is a game for or between Korchnoi and Geller Efim, and it's a very interesting game actually. d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7, queen's gambit declined, and knight f3. By the way, why bishop e7? To stop this line, which is c d e d, and then bishop g5. So kind of a nice move order. However, after bishop e7, knight f3, the knight improved, and knight f6 happened. By the way, the problem with bishop e7, because sometimes you need to go bishop b4. Yeah, sometimes you play other stuff, you know. So it's a committal move, kind of. But anyways, bishop g5. Castling short, e3, h6, attacking the bishop. The bishop went back, and now b6 was played to improve the light square bishop. No problem, bishop e2 first, and then bishop b7. And now Korchnoi found a very great move in this position. Not great actually, but a very interesting move. Because now in this position, after bishop e7, black's idea is to play d takes c4 and opening things up, or open the diagonal for the bishop. However, if you take this way, then there's simply knight takes d5. You take on e7, I'll take back simply queen e7, and the diagonal is open. I'll go knight d7 followed by c5, or c5 followed by knight c6. Black actually is doing great, like equalize out of the opening with no problem, you know. That's why in order to create a problem here, white started with bishop takes f6. Why bishop takes f6? Because after bishop takes f6, c takes d5 to be played. And now if you want to keep the diagonal open, you need to take with the bishop, but your bishop will be taken. And after queen takes d5, ideas like knight d2 is super dangerous, as bishop f3 is a threat. For example, if queen g2, bishop f3, you will lose your rook at least, or an exchange. Worst case scenario. That's why after c takes d5, e takes d5 needed to be played, and now you feel like there is a problem with the bishop being on b7. This is not the best square for the bishop, especially with the pawn being fixed on d5. But black is fine, like black is not losing or something. But he has some practical problems. And Korchnoi castled short. Queen e7 to be played, and then queen b3, attacking on d5 twice, so rook to d8, and now rook a to d1. Why rook a to d1? Because if black didn't play c5 in the near future, then he will be left, and this is most likely something we're going to talk about in the hanging pawn structure in the chess structure book, you know. We have started talking about the isolani, but I'm sure the hanging pawns will be there. However, if black in this structure didn't play c5, then after a couple of moves, his c pawn will be backward pawn, or will be a weak pawn, and will be a target of attack. That's why this has to be played. c5. And now Korchnoi took, attacking on d5 one more time. So he cannot take back, as you will lose a pawn and probably the game. So that's why Geller played bishop takes c3, which is kind of forced. And now queen takes c3. An interesting move was c6 first, in order to play against the isolani, though computer says d4 is a possibility. However, after bishop c3, queen c3, b takes c5. Now Korchnoi played rook to c1, attacking the pawn on c5. Knight to d7 to protect that. And now I will show you a game of Korchnoi in probably 79, something like that, And then we'll show you a game of Magnus in 2014. Applying the same ideas. That's actually show how Magnus, or how strong Magnus is. So here Coach Roy played rook c2. Probably preparing ideas like rook c1. And now after rook a to b8, b3, because overprotecting the pawn on b2. Queen to e6, and now rook d1, bringing the rook to the game. Queen b6. And now how to improve? Because if you think about the position, I mean, black is standing very well. c5 is under a good protection, d5 is under a good protection, and it's completely fine. Here came the move that changed the flow of the game. After this maneuver, everything is changed. And it's one of the suggested move by the computer. Here's knight e1. Why knight e1? Two ideas. Open the diagonal for the bishop, maybe bishop f3 or bishop g4. So the bishop will be activated. And also knight d3 attacking the pawn on c5. Guys, something to be said about the hanging pawns. One of the strategies for to play against the hanging pawns is to provoke the movement of one of them. Like for example, let's say this is an acceptable move. By whatever mean. Now the d4 square is super weak. And the d5 pawn is super weak forever. And vice versa. Like if you go d4 without really calculating that, then c4 is a weakness and c5 is going to be weak. So the problem with the hanging pawns is it's not practical to play with. To play having them, you know? Because you need to be super precise. So knight e1 came, which is a great move. And now Geller played rook b to c8, but then bishop g4. Attacking the defender of the c5 pawn. Geller played queen g6, hoping for some sort of counter-attacking, but now bishop h3 first, and after rook c7, simply knight d3. Attacking the defender, and adding more pressure to c5 pawn. What a simple, yet effective strategy. Knight f6 was not a good move, actually, it was a bad move, and now simply queen a5. The rook is under fire, and the pawn is under fire, everything is under fire. Black played knight e8, but actually in vain, as rook takes c5 simply wins a pawn, but with zero compensation. Queen takes c5, and believe it or not, black resigned. Most likely knight takes c5 is much better, as it's +4 now. Can you imagine that? +4. Because the bishop is under fire, also the rook. And if rook b8, for example, then knight b7, rook b7, queen d8, and it's not easy to protect the knight. If f6, for example, then queen takes d5, and the rook will be taken. If you go with the rook here, then bishop f5 first, and maybe bishop b6 later. Okay, before we go to the next example, here in the Magnus game, he played this nice idea, queen a3 instead of rook c2. And after queen f6, bring the rook to the game, h3 first, and then, yeah, according to Coach Noy. Sometimes I feel Magnus knows everything. Like who said that? Probably Botfinnik said that. Botfinnik said Fischer knew everything written about chess. And I am about to say that Magnus knew everything written about chess as well. It's very crazy. Knight e1, the same idea. The same opening, the same line. Rook c8 and now queen b3. Exchanging queens, and all of a sudden like bishop b5 to attack the defender, and then rook a1 attacking here, knight d3 attacking here. Too many questions, too many attacking ideas. King g7, rook a3, and then check, and knight or the pawn actually is going to be taken. Take, and all of a sudden he just exchanged knights. I mean, ending up with this same color bishops actually, and it's just losing because the b3 pawn cannot be protected. And the f7 pawn is under fire. So you need to protect. Now the king is coming, and bishop e6 first, simply g3. King here attacking the pawn, not b4. No, it's b3. Computer says it's equal, but it's not that easy, you know, not that easy. Bishop d3, b4 first, exchange pawns, and actually that was actually an oversight. G takes f4 needed to be played, and after bishop takes h3, this is a winning position, as Magnus has this idea, which is king e3, followed by the strong move bishop e4. The point of bishop e4, if you take here, then it's simply f6. If you take, I will take your bishop, and otherwise I'm going to play f7. If you go bishop d5, it's simply f7. You take my pawn, and then b7. and I'll be queening for sure, or the other way around to push the pawns. What an idea, knight e1. And guys, this is actually typical, and it happens in many chess openings, especially if you play these structures with white or with black. Let's go again for kind of end game example, not a middle game example. Caruana playing in the one of the USA championships and playing against 2477, and he was black here, and he took back the bishop, and he's a pawn up. However, white actually is very active, like rook e7 attacking the pawn, and wanted to play rook b2 b7, which is actually a very serious idea, very serious threat. So Caruana found that he could go rook b4. And the point is, if you take my rook, I'll take back, and when you take on e5, it's simply knight e2 check first, and then b3. And queening is coming. Yeah, you stop that with knight d4, attacking, protecting, and then check first, and it's actually a checkmate, it's not a check. Or another actually good way, if it's not a checkmate, it's to go b2, threatening check and queening, and the king cannot move to this side. Even though if the pawn was on f3, it's again b2, because if king b2, I will queen with check. Otherwise, I'll play rook a1 and then b1 check, because this is a stupid knight on the corner. So after rook b1, Caruana played rook b4, and you cannot take. But white said, no, I will go rook d1. Now I'm threatening rook d to d7. Actually, I cannot allow this. For example, if I go rook b b2. This is just a draw. Then what can I do? If I go rook b4, then he will go rook b1 again. That's actually not nice. Computer says this is fine, but actually rook b b7 is annoying. And now you will go through a very crazy position. But what did Caruana play? How did Caruana solve the problem with the pawn? What an idea. Brilliant move. The point is, knight d8. So the knight makes the position stable, and now the knight is protecting the pawn, the rook is protecting the knight, the pawn is protecting the rook, and just push. He's simply winning. Rook b to c7, and now king f6 first. f4 trying for something, but check first. King h2 and e takes f4. Threatening f3. Check, use this. Rook takes c5. See, now threatening some source of e6. No, I'm not interested. Attacking the rook, f3 is coming. Rook c3 to stop f3, but rook d to d2 is good enough to win this game, as this knight stays in the corner and rook takes g2 cannot be prevented, as rook g3 is not a possibility, and it's not actually only a check, it's a checkmate. What an idea. Guys, it's very simple, yet super effective. I mean, this is the idea that caused the loss of white. Okay, last example. Here we go. Like, let's skip the opening phase and reach this position. Sokolov said I was there. I was there playing, and this game was next to me. And I thought, like, why doesn't have better than to go for perpetuals? Like, g4, king here, check, and then another check, and another check, and it should be a draw. Which is fair enough, like, white is 2700, black is 2660, so nothing, I mean, nothing wrong with this result. However, white found out this crazy idea, which is, if I go g4, and now the only move is, because king here, there is this, so the only move is king g5. If I could go h4, then I'm winning. But wait, the evaluation bar said no, you're losing. Yeah, because of king g4. This is the only move. So if the g4 pawn is protected, then this is a checkmate. So it's the crazy move, knight d1. Wow. This is just wow. Why, guys, is it wow? Because first of all, you cannot take this knight. Like, check, king h2, you take the knight, it's g4 check, king g5, f4 check, and it's a checkmate. It's a forced checkmate. Okay. And what's your idea? My idea is just to go knight e3 followed by g4. So the g4 square or pawn will be protected. If c3, again knight e3. If you go c2, then it's g4. You go king g5, it's h4. You take check. And you try for queen h5. So if you take, I will be queening with check. But actually it's knight g2 check. You have to take check. You have to go back and checkmate. What an idea, what an idea. Maybe a better checkmate is this check, check, and checkmate. Very interesting. So, how about bishop takes d5? Guys, if you have never seen this video, there is very little chance you find such moves during the games. So that's why this is actually a very important strategy and a very important book. So after bishop takes d5. By the way, I forgot to ask, haven't you subscribed to the channel yet? I'm not sure what you're waiting, because we're covering 7 books here. 7 books, guys. And 7 really good books. Simultaneously. Each day 1 book. Now knight e3. Threatening check, checkmate. What can you do? Like if king g5 is check. You take, check. You go here, check. You cannot cover with the queen. Actually it's forced, but you're losing. So black decided to give this check, but after king h2, nothing can be done to stop g4. The only thing you can do is just to take. But still your king is not safe. And after queen d4, knight g4 was played, threatening mate in 1. Queen d5 check, king h2. Queen d2 to stop queen h6, but then queen f7. Threatening again this check. Threatening probably the pawn. So c3, but now knight f6 check. And after knight f6 check, white resigned the game. Or sorry, black resigned the game. Because if you go king g5, it's a fork. And if you go this way, it's check first, and then a fork. And then we'll find a way to stop the pawn. Like for example, king f4, take, check, and take that guy. If king f5, knight d2 also works, you know. Queen f7 check, and then queen d5 or queen b3 to stop the pawn. And it's completely winning. And this is, guys, the end of this strategy. 4 examples, but 4 very valuable examples and very important chess strategy. If you want to see the first strategy of this book and the previous videos, I'll leave them at the end screen here. And don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, etc. And if you want to improve your middle game, your end game, your opening even, go inside the channel, go there. We have talked about openings, we have talked about middle games in a many aspect or a many instructive different ways, practical, tactical, strategical, etc. Thanks for watching again. See you in another one. Have a nice one.